Pope Francis has been accused of heresy. No, I'm just playing. we need a little bit of humor here. We need a little bit of humor and entertainment. Before we deal with the slander about Pope Francis once again, it continues. It doesn't stop. Over and over and over. Here we go. I am going to engage 10 heresies that Pope Francis is accused of having committed by Father Jesusmary Missigbètò, a suspended priest, suspended March 2021, and expelled from Opus Dei, and prohibited from preaching, confessing, and celebrating Mass, especially for the accusations that he made against Pope Francis that we're going to take a look at. Now, this, kind of went under the radar for a lot of people until just a couple days ago when Taylor Marshall, of course, decides to repeat the accusations and promote the accusations, accusing Pope Francis of heresy. And so I want to engage those specifically. Before we do that, before we look at the 10 heresies, let's first ask the question, what is heresy? Heresy is going to be for somebody post-baptism who denies a teaching that is revealed by God and confirmed by the Catholic Church as revealed by God. So a dogma, which is the highest level of teaching. There are also lower levels of teaching. In fact, a great variety of levels of teachings. Dogma is the highest. Therefore, when you deny a dogma, it's the censor of heresy. So it's one of the worst things you can do. Heresy is like, murdering one's soul, destroying one's soul. It's most certainly soul destroying, because if you are obstinate in denying or even obstinately doubting a dogma of the Catholic Church, it's heresy, which is a grave sin. So with full knowledge, full consent, that's a mortal sin. It cuts you off from the life of God and puts you outside of communion with Christ and his church. And also heresy is something that results in automatic excommunication. Per canon law, a heretic automatically excommunicated. By the way, so is a schismatic. But a heretic is automatically excommunicated, puts you outside of the church. So it's a pretty big deal to accuse somebody of heresy. Well, here we have 10 accusations of heresy. And we're going to really see, is that in fact the case? I want to, before we look at the actual article for this, because I'm mostly going to engage the article version. It was put into video format by Taylor Marshall, but rather than engage the video, I'm mostly going to do the article instead. But there was about 2 minutes of the video that I did want to start out by engaging. Let me share my screen. And you should be able to see it now. Okay. Let's start around the 5-minute mark. Like I said, we're only going to watch about 2 minutes before I dive into the article.
Have brought these errors, these concerns, these dubia to Francis Bergoglio. Then he says, this is Father Jesusmary, if the answer is yes, why do you refuse to correct errors that urgently need to be corrected to prevent the Catholic faithful from committing seriously immoral acts? With this letter, Father Jesusmary says, with this letter, I am not calling on Christian people to rise up, but on the Christian Pope to rise up to humility. Now, Father Jesusmary lists the accusations, the grievances. And this is important. I was just with my friend recently, like 30 minutes ago. We were talking about St. Robert Bellarmine, De Ecclesia, chapter 9, where Robert Bellarmine talks about the necessity for admonishing a pope under suspicion of heresy or incorrigible tyranny. Saint Robert Bellarmine, not Father Jesusmary, not the Dubia Cardinals, not Taylor Marshall or anyone on a podcast. Saint Robert Bellarmine says this. Let the process begin, is what I say as a Catholic, as a disciple of Saint Robert Bellarmine.
You heard that correctly. Taylor Marshall is claiming to be a disciple of Robert Bellarmine. Let me take him at his word then. Dr. Marshall, if you are a disciple of Robert Bellarmine, why is it that you take a position that differs fundamentally with Robert Bellarmine on this very issue? Why is it the case that, in fact, if Bellarmine were alive today, he would be on YouTube condemning you by name, censoring you by name? Why is that? Well, what am I talking about? Is it not the case that that Cardinal Bellarmine would be in favor of disciplining a heretic pope? Wait, the Cardinal Bellarmine who believed that a pope could not actually teach heresy. You know, this whole exercise and this whole discussion that Bellarmine engages in on what would happen if we have a heretic pope was purely theoretical for Bellarmine. Bellarmine did not believe that pope or any pope could be a heretic, which is why he wrote an apology for Honorius, Liberius, and everybody else accused of being a heretic pope. Why is it he spends this amount, this books this long, this thick, defending popes against the accusation that they're heretics? What happens is people like Marshall don't really look into things very carefully. And so they see Bellarmine discussing, well, here's what to do if you had the case of a heretic pope. And yet they completely do not discuss the elephant in the room, and that is Bellarmine didn't believe that you could be pope and a heretic. He did not believe that there was such a thing or that there could be such a thing. If Bellarmine were alive today, he would be defending Pope Francis against people like Taylor Marshall. So don't say you're a disciple of Bellarmine when in fact you're opposed to Bellarmine's position on a heretic pope. You do not espouse Bellarmine's position. I espouse his position much more closely than you do, Dr. Marshall. Why don't you make your audience aware that Bellarmine actually didn't believe a pope could be a heretic? Why don't you bring that up in these discussions? It's a fair question. Well, let's move forward, bypassing that issue, and let's maybe just talk about what is said by the priest. Let me share. Well, yeah, I'm going to share my screen. Okay. There we go. All right, so you should be able to see my notes here. And I have a quote from Father Jesusmary that you could see where he starts out the accusations of papal heresy as follows. In reality, since 2016, various errors have appeared in the official teaching of the church. That's already a massive claim. Can there be errors in the magisterium? Yeah, lower grades of error there can be, because you do have this phenomenon of non-definitive teachings. So by definition, you could have an error. But obviously, he's not limiting himself to lower errors. He is including heresy, which is the highest form of error, which is a thesis I would reject. But he says, various errors have appeared in the official teaching of the church and have created a crisis of confidence of the Catholic faithful in you, that is, in Pope Francis. Because to truly love God and their neighbor, their hearts need the truth as the light of intelligence and prayer as the nourishment of the soul. He asks of Pope Francis, are you aware of your errors? If the answer is no, Is there not a lack of humility on your part in listening to the filial correction of many sons of the church? The irony here, saying that Pope Francis may lack humility. I wonder who's actually lacking humility here, Pope Francis or the accuser? Many sons of the church who have drawn your attention to these various errors. And he includes this thing right here. You see that? What does that say? Let me zoom in on that for you. Can you see that? Should be able to see it. One of the examples he gives is the open letter to bishops, April 2019. 20 signatories. Huh. That sounds familiar. You know why? Because I'm one of the signatories in that document. I'm one of the individuals who signed that document accusing Pope Francis of teaching heresy. I'm one of those individuals who offered that filial correction. And I have retracted my position on that already. And just to be clear, even though I've already done it previously, let me do it again. I formally retract my signature on that document. And I no longer accuse Pope Francis of teaching heresy. But I'm one of those signatories that he said, Pope Francis, you should listen to these guys. Okay. Well, since you bring this into the mix and I'm one of those people, I get to comment on this. In fact, if you look at it, there it is. Show you my signature on it. Let me pull my rad trad card here. Let me bring that one out. See, I was a bona fide rad trad way before these guys were talking about this issue. Way before Father was accusing Pope Francis of heresy, and even Taylor Marshall. Before these guys were doing that, I was already talking about this stuff. They didn't sign this document. Prominent clergy, scholars accuse Pope Francis of heresy in open letter. Guess where it's published? LifeSite News. Yeah. Do a keyword search here. There you go. Michael Lofton. Okay. I'm one of the individuals who signed the document and accused publicly Pope Francis of teaching heresy. I've again retracted that position. But I'm one of the people who did it. Way before Father was doing it. Way before Taylor Marshall was doing it. And now I'm going to correct those who are doing it today. Let's go to the next point here. He says, on March 19th, 2016, on the subject of remarried divorcees, you stated that in such situations, many people, knowing and accepting the possibility of living as brothers and sisters, which the church offers them, point out that if certain expressions of intimacy are lacking, it often happens that faithfulness is endangered and the good of their children suffered. On September the 5th of 2016, with the bishops of the pastoral region of Buenos Aires, you affirmed that the commitment to live in continence can be proposed. Amor Laetitia does not ignore the difficulties of this option. The mentioned option may not, in fact, be feasible. On June 5th, 2017, you ordered that these 3 sentences be published as authentic magisterium. Well, what do we say to these things? Well, obviously the claim is that Pope Francis is just saying, hey, it's perfectly fine to engage in adultery and it's not an issue. It's not a problem. Which would then be what? To accept something that is intrinsically evil, right? That's the accusation that's being made here. That's one of the heresies. Well, look, I have an entire video dedicated to this called The Truth of Amor Laetitia. I'm not going to go into it in any kind of detail since I already did a 2.5 hour PowerPoint presentation going through Amor Laetitia, the dubia, follow-up documents, guidelines, and various objections. I've already gone through all of that. I'm not going to rehearse it here. But I'll just briefly mention this point. It's not that clear cut. That's not what Pope Francis is endorsing. He's not saying, hey, it's perfectly fine to engage in gravely sinful acts and to be in a state of mortal sin and then to just go and receive communion. But that's what he's indicating here. That's not what Pope Francis teaches in Amor Laetitia. In Amors, it is incredibly and painfully clear that not only are they called to the ideal standard of Christ, but they're specifically referring to individuals who, number one, they're morally certain that their first marriage was invalid. So they're actually objectively not in a state of divorce and remarried, but rather their first marriage was in fact not a marriage. And they're morally certain of this. There's a strong moral reason to believe that that is the case. There's a moral certitude there. And no, they have not gone through the canonical process for one reason or another. And there are a number of reasons why that may not have happened. But it is morally certain that the first marriage was in fact not a sacramental marriage. And thus, the union that they're currently in, the marriage that they're currently in, is not a second marriage and is thus not adultery. That's number one. Number two, he also is talking to individuals who have mitigating circumstances to where, even if this were a, objectively speaking, grave matter, they have mitigating circumstances that reduce this to a venial sin. Now, question for you, can you receive communion if you're in a state of venial sin and not mortal sin? The answer to that is yes. So this shouldn't be a difficulty here in conceding that point, if those terms are in fact present. If that's in fact true, you can receive communion when you're merely in venial sin. Otherwise, none of us could ever receive communion. That's the reality. None of us is we're never really free from, at least most of us are never going to be free from venial sin. I think it could certainly be argued that it's incredibly rare, if that's ever happened, where you have somebody who previously contracted original sin and somehow is free from venial sin prior to death. Wow. Number three, if you look at, again, Amor Laetitia and the guidelines that were approved, it's always explicit that this individual is to have recourse to reconciliation in Eucharist. Not merely Eucharist, but reconciliation as well. Confession. But they present this as indicating that Pope Francis is just saying it's perfectly fine to be in a state of mortal sin, perfectly fine to be in an adulterous union, and then perfectly fine to not confess your sins and to receive communion. All three of those things are false. That's not actually what he says. He, in fact, makes very clear the opposite. Now, he's not going to engage any of that, Father Jesusmary. He's not going to engage any of that. He's just simply going to throw out this claim and cite footnote 329, which I dealt with at length, and doesn't substantiate his claim. So now the issue of living in continence being proposed as an option, again, is in reference to individuals who already have mitigating circumstances and they're morally certain that their first union wasn't a sacramental marriage. He left that part out. Kind of a game changer, isn't it? Yes, it is. Moreover, if this is part of the authentic magisterium, okay, so you're just saying that you don't accept that. So you do not offer religious submission of intellect and will to that. Okay. All right. But just keep that in mind next time you try to rebuke those who oppose Humanae Vitae or Pope Paul VI in Humanae Vitae, and try to say, you know what, I'm going to dissent from Humanae Vitae. Because they're going to argue that's also merely authentic magisterium. And they're going to say, well, you get to dissent too, right? Why can't I? Upon what basis do you criticize him? Keep that in mind. He goes on, that is, the priest accusing him of heresy. Since when has a pope affirmed that the virtue of chastity is an option? Pope Francis didn't say that. I told you the context already. He never said that. And present fidelity and the good of children as excuses for committing adultery or fornication. That's not what he said. Acts that are intrinsically immorally evil. Never. You have thus allowed certain Catholics to receive Holy Eucharist without repenting of their serious sins. Gosh, he's going to have a difficulty in swallowing the pill when he finds out that council fathers at the Council of Trent tolerated the Eastern practice of economia in relation to divorce and remarriage. Not for people who were morally certain that their first marriage was not sacramental, but in fact individuals who were certain and knew that their first marriage was sacramental, and yet they're divorced and remarried and receiving communion without reconciliation. Oh, that's going to come as a shock to him. You have fallen into 3 heresies. Rejection of the universality of the 6th commandment. No. Rejection of the absolute character of the 6th commandment. No. Rejection of the resolution to struggle to avoid sin. Oh, you mean like Amor Laetitia tells people to do over and over? Which is an absolutely necessary condition for receiving the sacrament of confession. Oh, you mean like Amor Laetitia tells people to do? Okay. On the 10th of December, 2018, together with Cardinal Ladaria and Archbishop Giacomo Orandi, you authorize hysterectomy, the removal of the uterus, on the pretext of the agreement of medical experts who would ensure that no future pregnancy could come to term. Since when has a pope accepted such a practice? Never. You have fallen into a heresy, rejection of the divine law on procreation. Golly. Okay. Let me read to you from something found on the Vatican website. I'll put a link to it in the show notes. It addresses this in reference to this situation. The CDF, that is a Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith, response deals with a very specific case, quote, when the uterus is found to be irreversibly in such a state that it is no longer suitable for procreation, and medical experts have reached the certainty that an eventual pregnancy will bring about a spontaneous abortion before the fetus is able to arrive at a viable state. That's the context, which he didn't give to you. In those cases, the congregation says it can be morally illicit to remove the uterus, not for sterilization purposes, not for contraceptive purposes, because in fact, it does not regard sterilization. That is, removing a reproductive organ incapable of bringing a pregnancy to term should not therefore be qualified as direct sterilization, which is and remains intrinsically illicit as an end and as a means. So, much better theologians than Father have examined the case and shown that no, it is not direct sterilization. I would also add to this. Decisions made by the congregations with papal approval, of which this has, are infallibly safe. I refer you to Monsignor Van Noort Franzelin, Saliveri, Father Barry, and many other preconciliar manualists who will substantiate that claim, and individuals that I've shown and demonstrated and read on this channel already in other videos. Not going to reproduce that here. But they're going to say those even congregations, when they're papally approved, are infallibly safe. That language refers to, well, even if the decision is in error, which it doesn't necessarily mean it is in error, it just means it potentially could be in error. There's a safety there, an infallible safety, not necessarily an infallible correctness. So the proposition itself is not necessarily infallible, but that it will be safe to follow is infallible. So if you follow this advice or these instructions of the congregation, you're not going to be damned by God. It is morally safe. That's the traditional perspective. And I'll note that Father doesn't seem to be very traditional here. If Father was as traditional as he's purporting to be, why doesn't he accept the traditional perspective here? Perhaps because he doesn't know the traditional perspective, maybe as well as he thinks. I don't know. So he certainly won't engage that. On the 4th of February, 2019, here we go. I know I've dealt with it numerous times. Here it goes again. On the 4th of February, 2019, in the United Arab Emirates, you and Ahmed Al-Tayyib, Imam of Al-Azhar, signed a declaration on human brotherhood containing the following sentence, quote, "The pluralism and the diversity of religions, color, gender, race, and language are a wise divine will by which God created human beings," end quote. He says, this sentence confuses God's permission with God's will. God's will juxtaposed with God's permission. That's odd, because usually when we speak of God's permission, we speak of his permissive will. So we actually use that term in conjunction with permission, his permissive will. So we could maybe distinguish between antecedent and consequent will. Antecedent would be the ideal. Consequent would be God tolerates this in light of sin. God allows for it in light of sin for a greater good. Now, what's odd is he not only doesn't put this in the appropriate terms, the appropriate terminology, but he doesn't seem to be aware of the clarification, the well-known clarification that Pope Francis gave to Bishop Schneider on this very issue, in which Pope Francis says this is referring to the permissive will of God. So the very thing that Father here is saying is tolerable, that is the view that God permits a diversity of religions, is explicitly what Pope Francis said this means. Now, you could certainly fault Pope Francis for not putting that in the original document. Yeah, I think that it needed to be more clear. I thought this was sloppy. I thought it was poorly phrased because they're mixing categories here. God-willing gender is not the same as God-willing religion. One deals with antecedent. The other deals with consequent will. So I thought it was incredibly sloppy and irresponsible in some ways, misleading in some ways, even if unintentional. But Pope Francis did clarify that. Now, does Father mention that here? Of course not. It would completely destroy his point. He goes on to say that God has permitted the existence of a diversity of religions is true because God respects human freedom even when it errs by creating a religion that is not the one God intended. Father, if in the unlikely event you watch this, Father, Pope Francis explicitly said that is what he intended. He explicitly said that. Yep, go and look it up. It's well known. Just Google Pope Francis, Bishop Schneider, permissive will of God. I guarantee it'll come up within 5 seconds. Just Google that. You'll see it right there. Boom. It's been out for years. For years now. So why are we still repeating this thing? He says, however, it is not true to say that God has willed that there should be a diversity of religions. That's also incoherent because when we speak of God's permission, we're referring to his permissive will. Again, he's not even phrasing this correctly. In fact, some religions practice evil, for example, idolatry or sacred prostitution. But God cannot will evil. He can permissively will evil. Since when has a pope made such a statement? Never, he says. You have thus accepted a religious relativism that puts all religions on the same level and denies the specificity. Talking is hard. Specificity of Christianity as the supreme religion willed by God. There is no salvation apart from Jesus Christ. That's odd, given that Pope Francis has like several homilies explicitly saying that Jesus is the only way to salvation for everyone, not just for Christians, but for everyone, and that everyone needs to repent and trust in Jesus as their only way for salvation. That's odd. Is he going to engage that here? Of course not. This is why you have taken part in the idolatry of the 3 pagan ceremonies, Pachamama, October 4th, 2019. Let me show you something. Let's go to it real quick. Let me pull it up. All right, so see this video right here? That one right there on the screen. 7 hours ago. Pachamama, is this a crime? I highly encourage you to go and watch this video. And then you'll understand why I'm smiling here. Go and watch that video. And then I want you to check out the truth about Pachamama if you haven't seen it already. In this video. Go to it. Should be able to see it now. The Pachamama ceremony at the Vatican explained 5 months ago. It says the Pachamama incident right there in the thumbnail. Go to that video and watch that. Because it completely dismantles the Pachamama argument, the claim that Pope Francis engaged in idolatry. Pope Francis not only did not engage in idolatry, but the image that is under evaluation here, that is in discussion, wasn't even Pachamama, it was the Virgin Mary. And that has been beyond all shadow of a doubt substantiated. Not only by the person who created the image, but also by the people at the event. And the actual video footage and audio footage of the ceremony at the Vatican Gardens. And all objections to the contrary have also been overturned. So it is a grave sin to continue to promote the lie and slander that Pope Francis engaged in idol worship, and specifically the idol worship of Pachamama on October 4th, 2019. And what does Scripture tell us about those who promote slander and lies? Well, as I've noted many times on the show, those who promote lies and slander and are unrepentant will spend eternity in the lake of fire, according to Revelation 21:8 and 1 Corinthians 6:9 through 10. So this is a pretty big deal to continue to throw this out 4 years later, after this has already been overturned and shown to be a false accusation. He adds also the Canada ceremony, which I was amazed when I found out the truth there. Pope Francis was completely exonerated here. Let me pull it up. Let's go to it here. There we go. Getting the name of the title here. It's with Father Anthony Deacon Dragani, and it is called, "Was Pope Francis in a Canadian Pagan Ceremony?" Was Pope Francis in a Canadian Pagan Ceremony, with Father Deacon Dragani. Go and watch that video, and you tell me, did Pope Francis engage in idolatry? Or instead, do we have yet another false accusation being brought up here by Father in public? A very grave accusation, if false. And make no mistake about it, it is false. There's no excuse for this. An intrinsically and morally evil act, he says. You have fallen into two heresies: rejection of the goodness of God's will and rejection of the uniqueness of Christ's saving mission. Something that Pope Francis explicitly actually affirms, as I've said already here today and demonstrated on this channel. On the 15th of September 2021, February 5th, 2023, and 10th through 11th of March 2023, you called these same laws on the pretext of the legal sharing of socioeconomic benefits. Since when has a pope acted in this way? Asking humanity to adopt homosexual cohabitation laws. Never, he says. You have thus committed the most publicized papal error and a gravely immoral act by authorizing an intrinsically evil sexual cohabitation. That sounds familiar. Because if carried out just consistently, you would have to accuse Augustine and Aquinas of the same thing, would you not? Hold on, let me block the troll in the chat here who's saying I'm a pope splainer slanderously. Have a great day, sir. Here's a historian, Vincent Dever, who says something pretty interesting about Augustine and Aquinas. He says, instead, he notes that the state should allow fornication and prostitution, referring to Aquinas, to exist for the sake of the common good. Did you know that Aquinas maintained that? Again, Aquinas based on Augustine. Fornication and prostitution should exist for the sake of the common good. Relying on the well-known passage from Augustine, Aquinas advocates toleration of prostitution by noting, accordingly, in human government also, those who are in authority rightly tolerate certain evils, lest certain goods be lost or certain evils be incurred. Thus Augustine says, if you do away with harlots, the world will be convulsed with lust. If these social practices were to be suppressed, the public reaction might be such as to threaten the peace of society. Now, I'm just saying, if you're going to say that Pope Francis is guilty of heresy here, which I'm not conceding, but I'm just saying, if you're going to say that, are you going to say that about Augustine and Aquinas too? Would Father say that about Augustine and Aquinas? Good luck with that, Father. Let's see how well you'll be received in traditionalist circles once you anathematize Augustine and Aquinas. On the 15th of September 2021, he says, on the pretext that communion is not a prize for the perfect, in a press conference. I could do you one better. Just go to one of his Angelus speeches. You authorized all publicly pro-abortion politicians to receive the Holy Eucharist without the need for them to reject their attachment to abortion. Not true. But I'll point this out. This is the same Pope Francis in 2018 who said, we know that one who has committed a serious sin should not approach Holy Communion without having first obtained absolution in the sacrament of reconciliation. It's odd. Because what Pope Francis is saying here explicitly contradicts Father's spin on Pope Francis's words there. Now, after that, because that's pretty much the end of the accusations. Well, let me rephrase. That's the end of the specific accusations of heresy. But he does go on this very long rant. I accuse Pope Francis, Cardinal Ladaria, Cardinal so-and-so, Archbishop so-and-so. I accuse Pope Francis. I accuse Pope Francis. I accuse finally the following cardinals and bishops. And he lists a whole bunch of them. I accuse over and over and over and over and over. Goes on this very wild rant. Make of that whatever you will. But I think it's pretty clear Father did not substantiate any heresies against Pope Francis. I'll say this, though. He goes on this long rant of I accuse. You know what that reminded me of? Yeah, pull up good old verbum here. Hold on. Bring it up. Verbum. Let's go to Zechariah 3:1. Share my screen here. I accuse. What does that sound like to you? Okay. A vision of Joshua the high priest. Then he showed me Joshua the high priest standing before the angel of the Lord, and Satan at his right hand to accuse him. And the Lord said to Satan, the Lord rebuke you, O Satan. The Lord who has chosen Jerusalem rebuke you. Is this not a brand plucked from the fire? Now Joshua was standing before the angel, clothed with filthy garments. And the angel said to those who were standing before him, remove the filthy garments from him. And to him he said, behold, I have taken your iniquity away from you, and I will clothe you with pure vestments. And I said, let them put a clean turban on his head. So they put a clean turban on his head and clothed him with garments, and the angel of the Lord was standing by. And the angel of the Lord solemnly assured Joshua, thus says the Lord of hosts, if you walk in my ways and keep my charge, then you shall rule my house and have charge over my courts, and I will give you right access among those who are standing here, and so on. What do we see here, though? What is Satan's role against the saints here. It's to accuse. And to an extent, there actually is something to accuse one of. Notice, he is clothed with filthy garments. There actually is something to accuse. Let me also show you something else. Let's go to Revelation 12:10. I accuse, I accuse, I accuse. Well, Revelation 12:10. And I heard a loud voice in heaven saying, now the salvation and the power and the kingdom of our God and the authority of his Christ have come. For the accuser of our brothers has been thrown down, who accuses them day and night before our God. What do we learn here? One of the things that Satan does is he accuses the brethren. He accuses the saints. He accuses those in the church day and night. I accuse, I accuse, I accuse. Make of that whatever you will. Is the accuser of the brethren at work here? Well, were any of those accusations that we've seen here really substantiated? Did Pope Francis really commit a heresy here? No. So what does that mean about these accusations? Where does it come from? You decide. Well, hopefully this was helpful. If it was, hit the like button, hit the subscribe button. Of course, check me out, patreon.com/Reason and Theology if you want to support me and what I'm doing here with Reason and Theology. Also, you'll get access to extra content if you join me on Patreon. So certainly check it out. And if you want more people to see this, if you feel this was an important message, hit the like button and the subscribe button and comment, because the more you interact with the video, the more YouTube will share it. So interact with it. If you want more people to see it and benefit from it, interact with it. All right. We'll see you later. God bless. Hey, everybody. Just wanted to tell you about my new free ebook, Church Chaos, Biblical Insights for Confused Catholics. If you are a confused Catholic and you're thinking about leaving the Catholic Church, or you're thinking about converting to the church, but you see that there's a crisis in the church and you're just unsure, this is the book for you. Again, it is free. Just simply go to reasonandtheology.com. You'll see a pop-up that comes up on your screen. Just simply click on it and you'll put in your email and it will provide you the free PDF ebook right then and there. Please check it out if you're confused about the situation in the Catholic Church today. reasonandtheology.com. Hey, pro-lifers, I want to remind you about realestateforlife.org. If you want to support the pro-life movement at no cost to you in the process of buying a home or selling a home, office, or any kind of property anywhere in the world, check out realestateforlife.org for more information. God bless. Hey, thanks for watching. Don't forget to hit the like button and the subscribe button. See you next time. God bless.